Okay, let's get started here. I will share my screen, and I think I'm just going to share the whole thing. Okay. Paper for today is our last paper on jumping from Harry et al., titled Effects of Footwear Condition on Maximal Jumping Performance. This is a good one to end on because it kind of goes to the opposite side of the spectrum on how science is done compared to most of the studies that we've read in class so far in both running and jumping. Broadly speaking, there's kind of two ways you can go about doing like lab-based scientific experiments. You can try to isolate a specific effect scientifically, which typically means you're doing a very tightly controlled experiment, trying to keep as many things as possible constant between whatever conditions or groups of participants you're comparing, other than that one thing that you're trying to isolate. Or you can lean clear on the other side, which is I'm just going to try to replicate reality in my lab and attach some objective quantitative assessments to things that I can't objectively quantitatively assess in reality. Most of the studies that we've read so far have been more on the let's isolate an effect side of things, controlling for a lot of details like the mass of the shoe and the depth of the counter movement and the swinging of the arms and stuff like that, trying to isolate a specific effect in the absence of potential confounders on performance, like those other things that I mentioned that could independently affect the performance. On the other side of things is let's just replicate reality in my lab. And that's what they did in this experiment. They were studying three different footwear conditions and the effect on vertical jumping, counter movement jump height, and broad jumping, jumping for distance. And no controls for how you did that, no special constraints, just put on the shoes and have at it. Jump as high as you can, jump as far as you can. Now, that's not necessarily like lower quality evidence than doing the really tightly controlled approach. It's just a different approach. And I would say it speaks more directly to like kind of an applied science, like directly working with athletes. It's not so good at isolating like what's the effect of cushioning in the footwear, but that's not what they were trying to do here. If you're an athlete and you're jumping in two different pairs of shoes and you want to know which one do I jump higher in, you're not going to add mass to the lighter shoe to make it heavier because one of the shoes weigh different weights. You're just going to jump in the shoe and see what happens. So it's more of more of kind of an applied, ecologically valid approach to doing science. So what exactly did they do here? A typical biomechanics study where you put the markers on the people and you jump on the force plates and measure the forces and do the calculations. Counter movement jump heights and broad jump distances. So we've done a lot of studies on counter movement jump height, some studies on broad jump distance. So they measured both of those things here. Did three footwear conditions, and those conditions were actually only two different pairs of shoes. So three conditions, but two different pairs of shoes. They did a barefoot condition, so no shoes, a minimal shoe condition, and a what they called a cross-training shoe condition. The minimal shoe is right here. It's a Vibram's Five Fingers shoe. Those type of shoes were really popular for a while. They kind of have fallen out of popularity a little bit. I still see them around quite a bit in like the CrossFit community. They're still pretty popular there. They aren't super popular as like running shoes anymore these days. At least I don't see them around too often. But they were kind of big in the running community for a while. They are very much a minimal shoe. They are probably the quintessential minimal shoe. Here's what that shoe looks like here. So a Vibram five finger shoe. It's basically just a covering for your foot that's extremely light and extremely thin and gives you some traction on the bottom and doesn't do a whole lot else. It's intended to be kind of a barefoot shoe. So a shoe that mimics the effects of moving and performing while barefoot. And that seems like kind of an oxymoron, right? Like a barefoot shoe, why not just go barefoot? But like there's lots of reasons why you may not want to go barefoot. You may step on something sharp or you may slip, right? So that's the intent of this particular shoe. Give the minimal protective aspects I need to safely perform in a way that's essentially barefoot. So give me some traction so I don't slip and give me some protection here for when I'm stepping on the ground and maybe stepping on something sharp. Um, I don't know why they've fallen out of popularity. I've never used them. It's never really been my thing. I've never really had any foot problems, so I've never had a reason to, to really mess around with my footwear too much. They did lose a fairly substantial lawsuit about 10 years ago for some of the like the health related claims that were being made in like advertisements about the shoe that didn't appear to have a great deal of scientific backing. So maybe that gave them some kind of bad publicity. But these are very popular shoes, and if you're looking for a minimalist shoe, this is a truly the quintessential minimalist shoe. They got quite popular around. This was a while ago now. I want to say like, the years all run together after a while, but somewhere between the last 10 and 20 years, there was a book, Born to Run by an author, Christopher McDougall, that went into like the history of barefoot running and the ostensible benefits of it for performance and for health. And that kind of led to kind of a boom in the popularity of these kind of shoes here. They were intended originally as what are called deck shoes, like shoes that are used when walking around on like boat decks or for like surfing and other water sports like that. So again, intended for traction on those slippery surfaces. But then they turned out that they were pretty popular shoes for running and work all right for running. So that was the minimalist shoe condition here. The cross training shoe was this New Balance shoe here. I don't think it was specifically this like colorway, but a shoe like this. And this isn't quite like a maximalist shoe, but this is more like your typical shoe for a general exercise purposes. I wouldn't recommend this shoe for running. It's quite heavy and bulky, but it's a popular shoe that you might use for like general like sports and exercise activity like gym type stuff. So fairly heavy and has a fairly high heel toe drop. If you see that term in like footwear, the heel toe drop is referring to like the height of the heel relative to the height of a toe. So the higher that heel toe drop is, so the more like the height of the toe drops relative to the height of the heel in the shoe. The higher that is, the bigger that drop is, the more when the foot's flat on the ground, the more plantar flexed kind of your neutral angle of the ankle will be. So in a shoe like this, for example, in the cross training shoe, when the foot's flat on the ground, your ankle when you're in that shoe and the foot's flat on the ground, the plantar surface of the shoe is flat on the ground, your ankle will actually be in a modestly plantar flexed position compared to the Vibram shoe here, which has no drop. It's the same height at the heel as it is at the toe. But then when the foot's flat on the ground, your ankle will be in kind of a neutral plantar flexed position. Okay, so along with differences in the mass and just the overall composition of the shoe, that's one of the other main differences is the heel drop of the shoe. Okay, then pretty straightforward biomechanics study after that. They had everybody in those different footwear conditions do some maximum vertical jumps with the counter movement and some maximum broad jumps and no particular controls for the technique or how you did that exactly. Just jump as high as you can, jump as far as you can, do it several times in the three different footwear conditions, and let's see what your best performance was. And then, like we've talked about in class, kind of counterbalancing the order of the presentation of those footwear conditions for each participant so that at least on average, there's no like order effects or fatigue effects in the day. And at the individual level, you can't really get around that. But if you kind of counterbalance it so that some people are doing barefoot first, some people are doing minimal first, et cetera, then on average, you can be pretty confident your data aren't confounded by those effects. In terms of performance, as you see here in figure one, the shoes didn't really do anything. No statistically significant effects of the footwear conditions on jump height. If you look like real close here, it looks like they might have jumped a little bit higher on average in the barefoot shoe versus the minimal shoe compared to in the cross-training shoe, which might kind of make sense. It's a fairly heavy, fairly squishy shoe, maybe not the best one for jumping in the world if your goal is like maximum jump height. But there you're talking like millimeters, like very small differences there, and no consistent differences where people consistently jumped higher in any shoe in any of these three particular conditions. So no effect of the shoes, or at least no large effect of the shoes on jump height. Same deal for jumping distance. It looks like on average they jumped a little bit shorter in the minimal shoes, but no statistically significant differences there in a broad jump distance. I might speculate there that effect is from when you're doing a broad jump, often to jump as far as possible, you'll get your feet kind of out far in front of you, like when you're doing a long jump, and your inclination there might be to like land on your heels, and maybe landing on your heels in a shoe with very little cushioning on the heels is maybe a little bit painful. Maybe you hold back a little bit when you're doing that. But then it looked like they, jumped a little bit further there when they did the barefoot condition. So maybe my intuition is off there. But again, I'm just kind of speculating here on these small differences. Statistically, there was no significant difference here in the broad jump distances, meaning like there might have been like at the individual level, you might see some people jump a little bit further in that shoe, but maybe someone else jumped a little bit further in this shoe, and you average it all together, and it's kind of a wash. There was no consistent effect of jumping distance in any particular shoe. So no real effect here on performance in these footwear conditions. As you then kind of might expect, if the performance was the same, we wouldn't expect any major biomechanical differences, and that's indeed what they saw. Not going to go through all of the details here just because there's a lot of data and they don't have any graphs of it, so it's just kind of a lot of numbers to look at. But all of the variables that from what we've talked about with like impulse momentum relationship and its effect on like jump height and all these things that you might think might be different if somebody's performing differently, presented here in terms of the ground reaction forces and the duration of contact and the impulse generated during the counter movement and during impulse generated during propulsion, all things that you might expect to be different if somebody's able to jump higher or jump further in a certain footwear condition. And they didn't see again, any consistent statistically significant effects there of the three different footwear conditions on those biomechanical variables, which makes sense. So we wouldn't expect to see differences there if people didn't jump further or jump higher. If you jump higher and jump further, generally you're going to be generating bigger ground reaction forces or for longer amounts of time. There'll be some difference there, and they didn't see any differences, which makes sense because they didn't see any effect on performance of these shoes. Where they did see some differences, so like what is compelling about this study? What did they show? Where they did see some differences is they had EMG data of the lower limb muscles in this study. EMG is electromyography. These are little sensors that you place on the skin above the muscles. They do make sensors that you can insert like with needle electrodes like below the skin, like into the muscles. Those are in better quality data, but they're more invasive, so we don't use them quite as often. Typically, it's a sensor that you mount with like an adhesive on the skin, and so you're kind of limited to measuring like superficial muscles there. This measures the electrical signal from the nervous system to the muscle. So it's the excitatory signal, the command from the nervous system to the muscle to tell it to activate and hopefully produce some force and perform some work. And the higher the magnitude that signal, like the more volts it is, the stronger the nervous system is requesting that muscle to activate to a higher level and ideally produce more force and perform more work. So I had measures here from all the major lower limb muscles, biceps femoris, a hamstrings muscle, medial gastroc, peroneus longus, a frontal plane muscle, the ankle, semitendinosus, another hamstrings muscle, soleus, the other main plantar flexor there, and most people soleus is the single largest and strongest muscle in the body. Dorsiflexor, and then two of the quadriceps, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis. Again, a lot of data here in the several tables that follow on the parameters of the magnitude and the timing of the activity in an electrical sense of those muscles in these three different shoes in these two different jumping conditions. I'm not going to go over all of it here, but anytime you see like a little symbol here, like these little daggers there, or this asterisk, or this funny looking S thing here. Anytime you see that symbol, that showing there was a significant, statistically significant, consistent difference here in terms of that type of shoe affecting the activation level of that muscle. And we're seeing here effects on activity of soleus, which is a big, strong muscle, activity of vastus medialis, which is also one of the largest and strongest and most important muscles in the body for athletics tasks. Down here, an effect on semitendinosus, one of the major hamstring muscles. So some pretty impressive results here for changing the activity level of the muscles. So kind of overall take home here is that the different footwear conditions in the study didn't affect your performance and didn't affect the biomechanics, which would make sense that we're used to achieve the performance. If it's the same performance, we wouldn't expect any major biomechanics differences. It did affect the activity of the muscles involved in eliciting that performance. So you can get into kind of some motor control content there in terms of what you cover in like KNES 370 and KNES 385, where humans have like flexibility in how we do our movements, right? The example I like to give on screen here, where all you can see is my face and my hands, is if I give you the task of take your index finger and touch your nose, most of you would move your finger through a path like this, right? Touch your nose. Okay, here I go. Touch. Touch your nose. Okay, here I go. Touch. I moved my finger there through a particular path to get to my nose. I didn't have to move it through that path. I could have gone like this, or like this, or like this. Lots of different combinations of using the muscles and joints of my body in lots of different ways to accomplish that same task. Okay. So here we're kind of seeing a similar thing, but in a more athletic task than touching your nose, right? People were able to, in these three different footwear conditions, using the same whole body, ground reaction force generating biomechanics, jump to similar max heights and similar max distances, but they did it with different distributions of muscle activity, suggesting even in like a max effort task like this, at least for these particular athletes, people were able to use different combinations of the distribution of muscular effort throughout the legs to accomplish the same thing, the same jump height, the same jumping distance, and that the impetus for changing that distribution seemed to be these changes in footwear conditions. So no real meaningful conclusions you might take away here on performance. I think this speaks a little bit more to like injury and protection and prevention of injuries. Like we saw an effect here on the activation level and ostensibly from that, the force production of the soleus muscle. So if you have an athlete who is jumping in a particular pair of shoes and they're having chronic issues with like pain in the plantar flexor muscles or pain in the Achilles tendon, Achilles tendonitis, common injury in lots of different athletes. Then from evidence on this study, you might think, well, maybe try changing your footwear, right? I don't remember which particular set of footwear it was here that had the different effect on the activation of the soleus muscle and whether it went up or down. But there's some set in there where you could envision a reality where an athlete's jumping in a particular shoe and they're having issues with their plantar flexors. And you say, well, here's some evidence that if you change your shoe from this type to that type, it's probably not going to affect your performance. It's probably not going to affect your biomechanics very much, but it will affect the distribution of your muscle activity. Maybe it'll offload that soleus muscle a little bit, and maybe we can keep up your performance and keep you able to perform, and you don't have to miss any serious time, and maybe offload that muscle a little bit. Something that's maybe worth trying if you have an athlete in that particular situation. Okay, that is it for today for that one. That wraps up the section on uh, jumping. Don't forget to take the midterm exam online today, Friday, March 13th, if you're planning on doing it today. If you're not, you can also take it on the Wednesday following spring break. And everybody have a great spring break, and we will see you a week after next. All right, take care.